Hello, everybody. Wanted to continue what I began last time. My consideration of the entirety of Bret Easton Ellis's literary canon. As I said last time, just completed reading The Rules of Attraction. That was the final work of fiction by Bret Easton Ellis that I was yet to read. And since I've finished reading it, that means I've read everything. And thus, I feel it would be appropriate to give a retrospective, as far as I see it, of the entirety of his canon. Now, this is not meant to be exhaustive. I'm not, going into too great detail about any of the books here. I'm just giving a sort of brief overview of them all, and I think how to me they fit together, or how where transitions can be seen in Ellis's writings, and what his early work has in common and how it changes in his middle work and his latter work. I shouldn't say his late work, because he's still very much alive. He's 60 years old. He's hopefully got many more years of writing left. But from the past, from the beginning of his literary career up to the present. Last time I talked about the first three books that Ellis published, and those are Less Than Zero, The Rules of Attraction, and American Psycho. Now, commercially speaking, Ellis kind of peaked early, or has peaked early, and hasn't really he hasn't published anything since American Psycho that has sold nearly as well as American Psycho, or nearly as well as Less Than Zero. Those, I think, are his two most commercially successful books by far. Less Than Zero was the sensation. It was, it got all this hype because he was discovered when he was very young. He completed it, at age 20 or 21. It was published while he was in college, and so he was this wunderkind, and it became this hot item, and I didn't mean it was that it was universally embraced by critics. Not at all. In fact, critics, as I understand, were mostly pretty rough with, mostly pretty negative about Less Than Zero. But it sold very well, and it built up very much of a following. And Bret Easton Ellis, started early as far as having a name, having a brand. His second book, Rules of Attraction, didn't sell nearly as well, but American Psycho eventually, I think, as far as I know, became, and it still is, his highest selling novel, I believe, by far. And that's interesting and ironic, because when it was written, it was almost prevented from being published because the publisher was under so much pressure from interest groups, particularly feminist groups, not to publish it. And the initial publisher actually did not, even after signing a contract with Ellis, even after everything was said and done, they eventually went back and on their deal and said, no, we're not going to publish this. Luckily, another publisher came around and did pick it up, and it was published. After its publication, Ellis was a literary pariah for a couple of years, because there were so many people who were so offended by the content of American Psycho, which I discussed last time. But eventually they came around, and a few years later, there was like in the late, or let's say the mid '90s, there came to be a reexamination of the book, and gradually it gathered momentum to the point where it was optioned as a movie, and eventually became the classic movie with Christian Bale uh, as as Patrick Bateman. His name slipped my mind there. Um, and after that, after the movie, uh, uh, with the rise of the internet, um, Patrick Bateman became a meme, a potent meme, and it got to the point where it was he was everywhere, and there were American Psycho parodies, and people dress up uh, as Patrick Bateman for Halloween, and he's just become this iconic character, which in some ways you could see from the book. He, as I said last time, he's this character who really does dominate the book as far as his voice, as far as um, uh, the impact he has in just about every way. He's a very strong character, in contrast to the first two novels, where none of the characters really made as much of an impression. It was more of an ensemble kind of thing. But in American Psycho, Patrick Bateman dominates the book in every which way. Not just because of his violent behavior, but because everything about his personality. Uh, so so eventually, it became this institution, and today everybody knows American Psycho. Everybody knows Patrick Bateman. It's a part of the culture. So commercially speaking, Ellis has never written anything with this that has had the same kind of impact as Less Than Zero or American Psycho, but he still has continued to be a good writer, and has grown as a writer and changed as a writer, and it's interesting to chart the way in which he has developed as a writer. Ellis is not a prolific writer. Uh, he doesn't churn out a book a year or anything close to that. It's more like a couple of books a decade, really. Um, he writes when he feels inspiration to, and one gets the impression that he is um, maybe compulsive writer. That he's maybe a perfectionistic kind of writer, obsessive. When he gets into it, he really gets into it, and he takes a lot of notes, and he does a lot of drafting, and he changes things around, and comes up with new drafts, and so forth. Some writers just go about things a little bit more naturalistically, but that's not how Ellis works at all. And the next book that the next one to come along after American Psycho, in the wake of American Psycho, as he was recovering from American Psycho. Uh, of course, nobody wanted to have anything to do with him. For a couple years after that, he was radioactive. Uh, but eventually, people came to their senses, and the next thing that he ended up publishing is kind of considered a minor work of his, although I still think it's got a lot of uh, uh, worthwhile stories in it. And that is, when I say stories, it's actually a short story collection called The Informers. It's the only book of short stories that Ellis has ever written. And the characters in The Informers are in some ways a lot like the characters. In fact, there might be some overlap. I've only read The Informers once, and I just got finished reading Rules of Attraction, and now I'm suspecting that there are some some character overlap, that a lot of the same ones who showed up as students at the college in the Rules of Attraction, that they were also characters in this book as well, the Informers. But some of them weren't there, and in any case, there's a wide range of characters, a wide range of stories, and they're unlike in the Rules of Attraction, where you have the same story, if you will, but everything, it's just a bunch of different characters experiencing a lot of the same situations, but in different ways. Here, these are distinct stories. These are stories that are distinct from one another. And I think in these stories you do have more of what resembles a plot. And I think this is a signifier of where Ellis is going as a writer. As I said, the first three books in his career really didn't have much in the way of plot. They were much more character driven, uh, and in some ways you could say they meandered. Um, I think Less Than Zero, definitely you definitely see a rise in the tension level from beginning to end, and I think there are also moments in the other two books where you get to a part where it seems like, okay, this is a crucial moment here. We're finding out something significant in the story at this point, and it feels more. It feels like things are coming more to a head. Uh, as far as revelations go, maybe. But in the first three books, the characters are all pretty static, are all almost completely static. There's no real character development, and as I said, one might end up feeling like, you know, I think there's a danger of it seeming monotonous at times, um, and that's a danger whenever plot is not the focus, because what keeps you reading, if not the plot, if not to see what happens to the characters and how it changes the characters. Normally speaking, that's why we read fiction. Uh, that's what interests us about fiction generally. Um, but in the Informers, I would say, even though a lot of the characters have the same kinds of issues, or fall into the same sort of category of being uh, um, from privileged backgrounds, and living empty lives, being promiscuous, taking a lot of drugs, feeling empty inside, but just sort of being numb and hollow about it all, being miserable, but sort of quietly miserable, uh, and and uh, and having a sort of cynical and detached take on it all. Um, I think that's also the case in these stories as well. There are some. I think we start to see, uh, just like in the American Psycho, the violence, the number, the violence is certainly amped up, and we have more atrocities reported on. In the Informers, there are more incidents that are disturbing. um, there's one story about a group of people who seemingly are vampires, or at least live as though they are vampires, and it's not clear, I guess, whether they really definitively are or aren't vampires, but they do, kill people and drink their blood, and so that's interesting. But that's The Informers. Now, after publishing The Informers, Ellis began to work on something that I think is in some ways his most ambitious work, and it's his writing that his novel that I think uh, somehow is the weightiest, both because it's very long, and also because it's very heavy, as far as the themes go, as far as the effect that it has on you. I'm talking about Glamorama, which was published in 1999, but it's my impression that Ellis worked on it for all pretty much through the 90s. It was um, it was a work that he stayed with fairly compulsively, and it's the first book I would say of his that actually has a plot, um, and it's the first book of his that I would say winds up being plot driven. Now, the first maybe third of the book is not so much plot driven. The first third of the book is just about this character, this guy who's sort of like a big shot model, uh, living in New York City, living the modeling life, who's um, starting a nightclub, and in this whole glamorous scene, the Glamorama, and but he's sort of up to no good. He's kind of his name is Victor, and Victor is he's a little bit of a cad. He's not exactly likable. He has a lot of the same kinds of character flaws that he has some of the same character flaws that Patrick Bateman has, with the exception that he's not a serial killer and not really a sociopath. He's just sort of like a shallow hedonist who doesn't seem to have much of a moral sense about him. Um, but he's also really dumb, and it has amusingly been pointed out that Glamorama in some ways anticipated Zoolander, the movie Zoolander, which I think just came out maybe the year after Glamorama, because Zoolander, the rather farcical movie with Ben Stiller, um, is also about a model, a male model, who's really stupid and who gets caught up in terrorism. So there, and that is what happens to Victor in this in Glamorama. Um, so I don't know to what extent that was accidental. Uh, I was not. I never thought Zoolander was all that funny. I know a lot of people really like it and think it's hilarious, and I don't have anything against it's kind of dumb, funny movies, as long as they're funny. I just didn't. Zoolander never really didn't never had that much didn't have that much of an impression on me as far as making me laugh or anything. But it wasn't. I didn't look down on it for being stupid, because I'm fine with stupid comedies. Um, but it's an amusing comparison, and there is a parallel there. So, in the first third or so of the book, Victor is just going around New York doing this and doing that, and he has a girlfriend, but he also is also has a mistress. He's also um, he's sleeping with the his boss's girlfriend, and he's doing all this stuff, sort of setting himself up for a fall. Going about things rather stupidly, um, and the one strange thing that's happening in the first part of Glamorama is that people are mistaking Victor, or saying, "Oh, Victor, you were at the party like last week in Monaco, right? You were, and 3 weeks ago you were at the that big event in Paris." And he says, "No, I wasn't there. I didn't do that." And that keeps happening over and over and over again. And it's sort of like in American Psycho, where the characters all confuse one another with other people. Patrick Bateman gets recognized as somebody else by a different. People call him by a different name, um, and um, but seem convinced that he's this other guy that he really isn't. And so there's this kind of running joke of all of these Wall Street guys being interchangeable with one another. And so even when he kills Paul Owen thinks he's Halberstram, and he lets him believe that he's actually Halberstram. And while Patrick Bateman is with Paul Owen, he badmouths Patrick Bateman to Patrick Bateman, but he thinks he's talking to Halberstram. And other things like that happen. So lots of cases of mistaken identity, and the same thing kind of happens here. But here, it we find out that it's happening much more deliberately. It's not just because he's like a dime a dozen. He's just like it's not like he's just with this group of people who all look alike and think alike and dress alike. Um, the second half of the second, I don't 2/3 of the book become very intense, and this very intricate plot uh, is takes shape, and it's like a spy story, sort of. It's like an international intrigue story about infiltration and terrorism and terrorist groups, uh, and Victor gets caught up in all of this stuff, and he gets you know just haplessly again. He's he's not a likable character. He's not a sympathetic character, but you gradually grow to sympathize with him because he becomes a part of this story that's just full of all of these nefarious other characters. These terrible, evil, wicked, psychopathic, terrorists and terrorist enablers and all these different layers of who's on whose side and what's really going on, and there's all this stuff. There's all these it's immensely complicated, because there's also all of this implication that things are being filmed and that his life is a movie, or that several movies are taking place at the same time, and different scripts are being put out there, and so it's sort of like it sounds pretentious to describe it this way, but when you're reading it, it's you're really caught up in it. It's like what's real and what isn't. You know, these people who are really doing terrible damage, like going out there. These terrorist attacks are described in in intense detail, um, and it's just becomes really just as upsetting to read in some places as American Psycho is, just because the descriptions of these terror attacks and the injuries and deaths that are visited upon people, uh, and the kind of things they do to some people, the way they torture them, and all the stuff that happens. It's immensely detailed, and you as you get further and further into it, you get more and more of a sense that Victor is just in over his head, and that there's, you want to see him be able to escape, but you get more, and you get less and less hopeful that that's even an option. Um, and the plot is incredibly intricate. And I say there is a plot, and there is, and you do, when you're reading. This was the first Ellis book that I think I read, uh, or chronologically speaking, it's the first like this, because I read other books in the chronology that come after this, and they were the same way. But it's plot driven in the sense that, like when you're reading a really like a great mystery story, and you want to find out uh, what the mystery. You want to find out what happens, and who the killer is, and this, that, and the other thing. And this novel Glamorama has those elements to it, but it's also kind of a book about, it's a postmodern book. And again, it sounds annoying to put it that way. It sounds pretentious to put it that way, but it's not. It's totally riveting. Um, this is maybe my second favorite novel of his, although I don't know when I'll want to read it again, just because it's very like I said, very intense and very heavy, um, and it wears you down. By the time it's over, you're just uh, a hollowed out husk of a man, because it's it's just it's a devastating read, but a great book. Um, this is probably, I would say Glamorama is maybe my second favorite book by Ellis, and so it's similar to Glamorama. Glamorama is similar to American Psycho in the intense violence that it depicts, but it's unlike American Psycho in that it has a plot, uh, and by the time it's over, you are blown away by all the different layers of what's going on. Apparently, what apparently is going on here with everybody, with all these characters, and who the real, like, there's a bunch of bad guys, a bunch of really bad guys, but who are the real bad guys, and who's in league with whom, and who are the terrorists, and who are the terrorist enablers, and all this stuff. Uh, so, and what ultimately happens to Victor is there's a little bit of mystery, but it's a, I would say, generally seems like a pretty tragic ending. So it's the first book where you I think really end up sympathizing with the protagonist, to a great extent, um, more than any other Ellis book so far. So that's Glamorama. Now I think the next, I'll just go one book more further into the Ellis canon, and because I think we're going to have to go, maybe it's like we'll do 3 books per video. I think that's been working out pretty well so far. I think it'll be Well, maybe there'll be one book left to spare. I don't know. We'll see how it goes from here. But the next book that Ellis published is my favorite book of his, but it's not one that I hear talked about that often, and it's one called Lunar Park. Um, Now, Lunar Park is Ellis being reflexive and self aware of himself as an author for the first time. Um, it begins as seemingly a tell all novel. Like you really do get the feeling. I felt like at first when it started for the first I don't know 50 pages or so, I was thinking, oh wow, this seems very authentic. This is like Ellis telling us about his career, like his life, and what what it was like to become a literary celebrity. Uh, but gradually, at a young age, and how it sort of went to his head and all that kind of stuff. But you gradually become aware that he's pulling your leg because there's stuff that he has himself doing that's just outrageous. That's not, and you think to yourself, "Wait a minute, that didn't happen." I mean, I didn't know much about Ellis's real life, but I know that didn't happen. That doesn't sound likely. Um, and he has himself like hanging out with all of these movie stars and snorting coke and just being everywhere in magazines and being incredibly visible as a celebrity, and that was never he was never that that high profile. um but he talks about like being part of a literary brat pack, and sort he's really kind of making fun of the whole thing, and kind of making fun of his own celebrity, or his own notion of celebrity, um and that's how it begins. And then what we eventually find out is that this is Bret Easton Ellis, and he's writing uh, uh, in the first person as himself, but it's like it's a Bret Easton Ellis in an alternate uh, universe where things went a little differently, and where he ended up, as part of his debauchery, uh, he ended up getting this woman pregnant, and then wanting her to get an abortion, but she wouldn't. And she was one of the movie stars that he was cavorting with, um, and so then she had his child, and then eventually, a few years later, he sort of settled down, went to drug rehab, uh, and decided to try to make married life work. And so he's living in the suburbs with this woman that he's now married to, and his son, who's who he's uncomfortable with, and who's uncomfortable with him, and um, and also a step daughter, that a girl that she had with somebody else, before he you know before he became clean and sober, and so he's living this life that didn't necessarily want to live, and part of him wants to go back to being a party animal, and doing all the things that he was doing before when he was just a big celebrity. But it's also set in this alternate world where after 9/11, things go totally haywire, and there's terrorist attacks all over the place, and everybody's living in fear of everything. Um, and so it's this very intriguing world that he creates, and inside this world, there's this there's something happening with Ellis's fiction, where where somehow uh, the Patrick Bateman from American Psycho has come back to seems to be seems to have manifested in real life as a kind of demon or something, and is killing people by the in the same way, with under the same circumstances that Patrick Bateman killed people in American Psycho. Um, and so there's there gradually there gets to be there's a supernatural element that eventually manifests. So it's again a very ambitious book. Um, it's much lighter. It's much less lacerating of a read than Glamorama, um, or really uh, than Glamorama or American Psycho. I'll say uh, by far. It's a more not more entertaining, but lighter. It's a lighter read, but that's not to say there still isn't stuff that's disturbing in it. It wouldn't be a Bret Easton Ellis book if there was nothing disturbing about it. But it becomes this issue of him trying to figure out what this who this is that's uh, creating that's wreaking this havoc, and it turns out to be some preternatural being that in some way is related to his father. And Ellis's father, both the Ellis of the book and the Ellis in real life, his father died when Ellis was young, and Ellis did not have a good relationship with his father, and his father, was a difficult character, a difficult man, uh, an alcoholic, and supposedly somewhat abusive, and ultimately, uh, you know, Lunar Park. Uh, in Lunar Park, we see Ellis's character come to terms with his own son, um, and also come to and his son come to terms with him, and in the process we see uh, him coming to terms with his father. And I can honestly say, and there's a lot more that goes on. It's very complicated. It's a very complex plot, and it goes all over the place. Goes lots of different directions. It's a fun read. I would say this again. It's my favorite. It's the one that I would say if you want to read any Bret Easton Ellis book, I would say read this one. That's it might not be the popular opinion, but it's my opinion. Um, and it ends with this wonderful uh, um, note. Like, I don't think of Ellis as a sentimental writer at all. He doesn't he's definitely not someone who you read uh, for and expect you know a sentimental experience. And yet the last few pages of Lunar Park, where the father son stuff gets discussed, and we see Ellis learning to forgive his father, and his and Ellis's own son in the book coming to forgiveness of Ellis's character, and this again this theme of forgiveness, this theme of redemption. And it is incredibly moving, and I was tearing up. I was actually tearing up. Uh, so that's where I'll end with this kind of intermediate discussion of Ellis's fiction. Um, Again, Lunar Park is also very plot driven, and if Glamorama is sort of a postmodern take a spy story or story about international intrigue and so forth. Lunar Park is kind of a postmodern take on a Stephen King like story, like a horror supernatural kind of story, but it's an incredibly endearing, and I would say, like, as far as his work goes, Lunar Park is by far my favorite. So we'll end there for now.